Welcome everybody. Tonight I will be talking on how to review our family trees. Now, all of us have done considerable work up to now on doing our trees, and Declan Chalmers and myself and a few others have requested that you possibly hand in your trees to us, and we've reviewed some of them already. Now, all of us haven't complete trees, because if you go back 3, 4, or 5 generations, we have more on one line and less on another. So there's always more to be done. And there's also a lot more information out there now than there was 2 years ago or 3 years ago when we were looking at a specific line. So I'd advise people always go back and have another look. And when you're drawing out your tree, you know, as you're writing it down, you say, oh, I forgot that, and I have a little bit more to add here, and you'll actually see what you're missing as you go. I've 1 or 2 lines now that I have to do quite a bit more work on that I've only realised lately myself. Now, now, on the internet, and some people would not be that familiar with the internet yet, but I advise everyone to try and get a little bit of help. Whether you go to an internet cafe or to your local library, someone will help you, or you'll know someone who's good at it. And all you really have to do is know how to Google. Just type in the word, or type in the phrase, and put quotation marks, and away you go. And just be careful which link you go to. Quite a few sites are paying sites. There's usually a free site somewhere nearby. Just scroll down in it. Now, our city library, if even Google City Library, Cork City Library, or Cork Archives, they have quite a bit. Without ever even going there, you can actually see quite a bit. City Library has downloaded an awful lot of stuff at this stage. And the County Library, City Library, Archives, they all have little bits and pieces that the other one doesn't. For example, directories of Cork City and directories of Cork County, neither one has the same. Some might have more for one time period than the other, some might have some missing. So there's something there for everybody. Burial records. Now, quite a few of the burial records are now in the archives. You'll see that on the website. They're actually after scanning them down, and if you have the patience to go right through them, year by year, you may find something. St. Joseph's burial records, starting around 1880 up to about 1940, are now in alphabetical order in County Library, page by page. So if you go through those, surname, Christian name, you'll get a certain amount on which area of the graveyard they're buried in if there's no headstone, and then off to the archives or on the internet, and you look at that particular entry because you then know the date, and that may tell you the very spot. It might tell you their address, what they died of, their age when they died. All of those things may be in one spot and it mightn't be in the other. So look in several places for these things. Now, back to the internet again. Google Catholic Church records, and then Cork and Ross, and most of southwest Cork from say 1800 up to about 1880 is there. St. Peter and Paul's, Cork City, St. Finbar South, that's there. And there's actually more there than is on the database in the South Parish. There's about 25 years more, from around 1745 to 1770 on the internet than there is on the Roman site, for some strangers. Now the cathedral records for Cork City, they are in book form in the County Library, alphabetical order. You have all the christenings in one set of books, all the marriages based on the male, all the marriages based on the female. So 3 sets of books there, 1745 to 1900, and spilling over maybe to 1905, 1910, if a family had maybe 8 or 9 children. If they started before 1900, the records continue on. They had the 100-year rule, but they did go that little bit extra. Now, if a person wanted to pay, the Mallow Heritage site has all of Cloyne up and a little bit more. they have a new policy now for €25, I believe. You can look up 1,000 entries, which is far better than paying so much per individual entry. So if a person had a lot to do in the Cloyne diocese, write out what you needed and do a big long shopping list, and maybe for several of your friends, and for that €25, 1,000 entries you can look up, and you'll be quite a while going through 1,000 entries. Base it maybe on a particular parish, surname, pick all the suitable Christian names if you're doing a general trawl, or you might have something specific you want, but don't waste the 1,000 entries. Just don't go for 10 for €25. Shop wisely. Now, get on the internet, Google 1911 census, up that'll pop, search that, watch your spelling. Surnames today are not exactly what they were back then. Some people couldn't read. A lot of people definitely couldn't write. And when they were writing it down, some things were phonetic. For example, if they put Catholic Church, if you were asked what's your religion, Catholic, they put a K for Catholic, and then the policeman, who might have been Church of Ireland, an RIC officer, he would stick in the word Roman before the word Catholic. Occupation will be given. Quite often, nearly everyone was labourer, no matter what your semi-skill was. You're either farmer, labourer, shopkeeper. It was very basic, most of the names. You can not only search under Christian or surname, you can search by a DED, that's a district registration district. You can search by occupation, by the sex of a person, by the religion of a person. Now, either Catholic, or they didn't want the word Protestant. They wanted to explain which sect you were in. Usually, the Church of Ireland call themselves sometimes Church of Ireland, Episcopalian, Irish Church, and they had 2 or 3 other variations of that. The smaller sects, they had other names, like the Brethren, they're a form of Baptist. They had variations. You just put others. If you tick that box, you can get somewhere there. Now, 1901 census might have you with no O in your surname. 1911, where nationalism was developing a bit more, you suddenly might have an O. So you might have an O'Shea in 1911. You're looking for that same John O'Shea. In 1901, you won't find them. You have to take your O out of it. And names like O'Connell, it might have 1 N or 2 N's, 1 L or 2 L's. You've got to do a lot of just general thinking. If a thing can be spelled more than one way, you better try it all those ways. And even a totally incorrect transcription may be there as well. A K might be a C, or a C might be a U. You see, it wasn't here they were done. The 1901-1911 census was done with the help of the Canadians. The Catholic Church records were done in Bangladesh. So, the fact that they got them semi-right was a miracle in itself, when they didn't even have Christian names like ours. Now, FamilySearch.org is a very valuable tool. There's an awful lot there. All the births, marriages and deaths after 1864, and if you're Church of Ireland, your marriages after 1845, going right up until 1958. Now, 1864 to about 1875, the records are a small little bit sketchy because they were not all entered. It took quite a while for our clergy and whoever was in charge of a burial to take note of that and go and register the death or a birth. So you may miss little bits and pieces. Later on, it gets much better. You'll want to know the area a person was. If you're on the border of 2 different counties, or if you're outside the Cork registration district, you might be halfway between Cork and Macroom. You're on the boundary, therefore you might have to try in both of those areas. Now, outside of FamilySearch.org, there is another website. Unfortunately, you have to pay for it. It's Find My Past. That's another valuable tool. Now, where I find that handy is if you want to find out who the person, if you know one person in your family and you don't know who they married or when they married, but you have a vague idea, you can do a bit of fishing. Now, they won't tell you directly who the person is for privacy reasons, but they'll give you 4 choices. Now, in my family, on my grandmother's side, they were Church of Ireland, and Church of Ireland normally married Church of Ireland. I might be given a bird marrying 4 choices, and one name is a Church of Ireland name, so it'll stand out. And sometimes they won't give you 4 choices, they might only give you 2 choices. But then you can go fishing with those 1 or 2, go back to familysearch.org, take a note of each marriage with that person's name, the reference numbers, try with the other one, do it in reverse, and you'll get the right answer out of it. Then, right away, for a photocopy of the certificate of the birth, marriage, or the death to Roscommon, ask for a photocopy, give them the page, volume, and reference number. €4, Roscommon GRO, and you may be right, you may not, but €4 is far better than paying €20 in births, marriages, and deaths in Cork. And as well as that, what's in Roscommon and Dublin is more complete. What's in Cork is a copy. So you could be 20% out in the results. So I say always, familysearch.org first, Roscommon then second. And you might need 2 or 3 attempts to get the right one. But, it's well worth it. 3 4s is 12. 12 is far less than 20 anyway. I think what else? Now, before 1845, our population was very stable. People in the countryside stayed in their parish or close to their parish, didn't move very far. Even within the city, populations were relatively stable. The famine was the great upset. An awful lot of people travelled into the city and from there off to America. And you have little barriers there. Now, what I have been doing, and several others, is if we have a barrier and a problem and we can't get any further back, DNA is what we use. Now, it wouldn't be everyone's cup of tea, but it's a very handy tool we found. We were doing the Y on the males, and now we've got the family finder. Now, other people would have trees, and we'd have partial trees, and if they match us, we sometimes can put the trees back together again. And it can work very handy, especially in cases where there's been an adoption in the family. And you can only go back 1 generation and your mother or your father had been adopted and they don't know who their parents are. If it's a man, you can trace the male line on the Y, you can get the most likely surname. The female, I go straight for a family finder. My cousin Margaret commented on all of this last time we were here. Let me think now. Oh yeah, all of the records that we have on our own families, now we are all offering them in to be shared among ourselves, and most likely everyone here will have some connection with nearly everyone here. If we have been in this county for the last 200 or 300 years, it's almost impossible we're not connected, because there was a finite number of people to start off with. And if you take the number of people here now, we all had 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great. Now in the past, there were less people, not more. So there has to automatically be an overlap in some way. DNA will find that. Now, a lot of the records of if we were farmers are in Griffith's valuation. That's 1852. That's fairly thorough. It traces all the counties in Ireland. Started around 1850 to about 1855, about 1852 more or less for County Cork. It worked starting in Donegal and worked its way down. Now, it would trace the landowner and the tenants and their tenants. It would tell you the value of the land, the value of the house. And sometimes they had more than one lot. Now, if you have an ordinary name like John Murphy, sometimes it's hard to distinguish which John Murphy you're dealing with, but if you're in the same district, quite often you'll see a nickname put after a person's name. It might be John Murphy Tim or John Murphy Khan, to say these are two different people. Just watch those little things. Also, by the way, Griffith's valuation, Google that on the internet, it's out there. Title platement, that's out there too on the internet. With the title platement, that's far more incomplete in the records because it only traced the person who was farming the area of land. Quite often they had people living on cottages on the land with maybe less than a quarter of an acre, and they wouldn't appear at all. And sometimes the people who officially had the land didn't have the land, they had rented it out to someone else, and a lot of people were lost in the mix, maybe up to a fifth. Now, title platement is very, very accurate in some parishes, and it was far more sloppy in others. It was usually the Church of Ireland rector or his clerk that put it together for a particular area, with two other officials supervising it. And again, some did a good job and some did not. Large areas of bogs and waste, you might just see the word waste and who the landlord was. And you might have local farmers grazing, mountain grazing, but it mightn't even mention their names. Now, every bit of land in Ireland has or had an owner. Now, from 1704, the Registry of Deeds in Dublin kept those records in parchment form. Now, it's still all up there, and there's over 5 million entries. Now, on the internet now, if you Google Registry of Deeds Index, quite a few of us have offered the information that we have found when we went up there, and there's something like, I know 5 million is a lot, there's about 100,000 entries there now. Now, to search them in the Registry of Deeds itself, there are two means. One is based on the landlord granting a deed or lease to a tenant, so it's based on the landlord's name, and then there's another section when it's based on the townland's name. So you're talking about county, barony, townland, and they're all in time frames. Because there were less deeds earlier on, 1704, the time frames are large, maybe 20 years. And as the deeds increased in number, they had to shorten the time frame. Later on, it might be every 2 years. So you have to be aware of the time frames and look through the indexes. Say if you're looking by surname, in that time frame, A to Z, and then you've got to go to the next time frame, A to Z, based on the person granting the deed. Now, more than likely, all of us, our ancestors, were not the grantors, they were the grantees, the people receiving. So you're going to have to know a lot about the history of that area. Now, the Hollisword Blade Company, after the Chichester Court sales about 1702, they had huge chunks of County Cork, especially up in Muskerry. And they then passed on property to other people. So, Hollisword Blade Company. Now, another very large landlord would have been the Earl of Cork, Cork and Array, the Boyles. They were also the Earls of Shannon. So, you might have to look under Cork for the Earl of Cork, Array, Shannon, or his real surname, Boyle, for the grantor. Now, another little thing was, sometimes then, the people he granted the leases to, they then passed on the leases to more relatives, usually Church of Ireland, and then they would pass it on to a third person, and so on. They kind of expanded, larger leases being subdivided into smaller and smaller and smaller leases. And quite often they were in batches. You might have the Earl of Cork granting 5 townlands to one person for a time frame, perhaps 99 years, or it could be an in-fee lease, which is almost forever, for a large sum to begin with and a token sum per year. They call it a peppercorn rent. might be a 999-year lease. Now, all of the leases for the Muskerry area for 1730 to about 1800, not all, quite a few of them can be found in O'Keefe Cushman, which is another very valuable source. Bit tedious getting through it, but the City and County Library both have a copy of it.
What did you call it again?
O'Keefe Cushman.
O'Keefe?
O'Keefe Cush, Coismang. It means the O'Keefe family by the Mon, which is the Blackwater Valley, the upper Blackwater.
If
Yes?
you could read it.
There's part of O'Keefe Cushman in one of our journals.
That's correct, yes.
In the member
Yes.
section of the website if people are not interested in looking at it. Yeah.
And there's also an index in paper form in the county library. If you go through the paper index, then you know which book to look up. Another valuable asset in that set of books, and it's also in separate book form, is marriage license bonds there. Several other people have gone away and taken copies of these indexes, but they're incomplete. Gilman would be one, but in O'Keefe Cushman they're as complete as you will find, based on surname. And it isn't just Church of Ireland families, quite a few others. Daniel O'Connell's parents, they married in the Church of Ireland church, and there's a marriage license bond involved in them even. One of our O'Shea's was married a Trent, and they got married in a house privately by the Bishop of Cork, and afterwards they got married in Holy Trinity in the middle of Cork City. Now, you had to do it that way. The Catholic bishop first, the Church of Ireland one second, because if you did it the other way around, the Irish priest might have a little bit of a problem. I've seen in the South Parish one entry that he had to be rehabilitated for going to the wrong place. But it was usually for convenience. There was usually some legal loophole that someone had to get around. So, also, Church of Ireland records for burials. There's quite a number of graveyards where you would expect Church of Ireland christenings, marriages, and burials to be, and that would be it. But you'll also find mixed marriages there, and you'll also find quite a few burials there. St. Anne Shandon, there's about 1.5 acres there, I'd imagine, at most, is a record of 45,000 burials there, starting in 1772, right up to 1860, and about 4/5 of them are Catholic. So anyone living north of the river in Cork City, 1772 to 1860, it's quite likely you have some ancestor buried in that graveyard. There mightn't be headstones to them, but there is a record of the date in which they died. That's above in the representative church body library at the moment. And the Cove Ancestral Project also had a copy of it, but since poor Mr. Crosby passed away there recently, I don't know what's going to happen with that. But they are recorded anyway, true false. So this is just a touch of some of what is available. There is far more. I encourage everyone to keep on looking and
Don't forget the wills.
Sorry?
Don't forget the will. The will counters.
Every single person here has a fair bit of work done on their trees. Now, it'll be a fright if at some stage in the future that is lost. Now, if we can share them with each other, we all have something to give each other, and we have something to pass on to someone else later on. You know, it's actually preserving it for posterity. So, several of us here now, we're going to work on all the ones that have already been offered, and we're going to put them on a database carefully, and we'll be working more on our own. And anyone who has already offered them, they can, they might have a little bit more later. And anyone who hasn't offered them yet, we're willing to take them at any stage, any meeting, and we'll store them all carefully, and we'll be ready to share with you maybe in about 6 months' time, hopefully, if not sooner.
Hopefully.
Okay. Now, any questions?
What format do you want
Yeah,
the
that's
will?
right.
Thanks, good. What format do you want the information in?
Not sure what the question is.
The format?
The format.
The format of the question.
Well, do you want
Is it family tree maker, for
We
instance?
sorry?
Do you want family tree maker or one of those?
Oh Lord, no. No.
Well, you could take it in paper form at the moment.
We're giving out a pedigree chart,
Yeah.
okay, and just fill that in.
Yeah.
Oh
You
yeah.
got a sample there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you already have it in any form, you know, just
Well,
if you could print it out.
Well,
We take it in away from
by
school.
coincidence, I once when you were doing the talk, I had a few questions. So
Okay,
I said,
well.
I might well print out a bit of my family tree.
Good.
Well done.
Okay. Wallpaper.
I love it.
Lovely. Lovely.
I love it.
But you see,
These are the Lynches of Tracton, by the way.
They're not the Richard McCarthy.
I'm McCarthy.
Oh, sorry.
No, no.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. You
He
see,
was kicked out, killed Gray and he
you see, I think we were kicked out, kicked Gray. I'm stuck. You see, but I didn't bother showing the reason one because they're all fine. It's this crowd here. You see, I have their birth certs. I
Yes.
managed to download them. So I got their parents. So they would have been born around 1800 or 1790 or something like that. Now, I can't get back beyond that. And I know nothing about the other siblings. That Michael McCarthy, he's my line. I come from him down along the way, like, you know. But so I'd like to be able to trace any of those people as to what happened to them.
Yes.
They were born in 1841.
Do you have a townland for any of them?
Oh, I know exactly. I have the whole shebang of where they were, yeah.
In Kilcray, is it?
No, the thing is, this is down in West Cork. But the legend has it, we were evicted from Kilcray.
Right.
So
How
I'd
far
love,
west? You weren't down near Skibbereen by any chance, were you?
no, Clonakilty.
Because there's Gosnell.
Yeah,
There's one line of Gosnells down, or there was, down in Sherkin Island.
but yeah, that's right, yeah.
Would that be the same line?
I don't know.
Yeah. And the other line of Gosnells were around Kilmurray, and they're still buried there.
No, right.
Yeah. And do you know the particular town, the particular area in Clonakilty? This is actually
Oh, yeah.
the in-depth study we would do the following Tuesday. We help each other every so often.
Was it? Yeah.
Karen, oh, Karen.
Yeah, I should be asking this one.
No. Kilnagross, yes. That's just south of Ballinascar, southwest of Ballinascarty.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. And are they here in Griffith's valuation?
Well, Griffith's valuation, 1850.
Yeah.
Oh, I have no problem, I have all them.
Yeah. No, but they were present in that area at that time, were
They were, yeah.
Okay. What about Title Platinum? Did you look at that?
No.
Yeah. They weren't there, or you looked?
No, well, the thing is, I can trace back the family tree back to 1824 or whatever it is.
Yes.
But your Griffiths was after that.
Was yeah. No, but how about Title Platinum? Is Tim McCarthy there in titles?
I never looked at it, I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah. But that's out there on the internet. Just Google Title Platinum,
Yeah, I remember
Parish of
it.
Kilnagross, and just see if they're there at that stage, or is he back?
Right.
Is he back in the other spot? You know.
Yeah.
This is just one example now of
Okay.
just one little step. Or they might have moved about that time.
And the other problem, if you're interested in genealogy, you shouldn't be a McCarthy.
Oh, no, there are. If you're Murphy, it's even worse. Yeah.
In relation to all this, in what we want, if you could print that out in pedigree chart form, you know, in single charts. Your family tree, is it?
Family tree.
Yeah.
Family tree maker.
You should be able to print them out in pedigree charts. No bother.
You mean just...
Separate the different families.
Oh, all right, yeah.
You know what I mean?
And
And you could have 1, 2, 3 different charts.
But from what I can see there, you've had one or two people with very large families.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
that's what's got. That's what's happened there. In one generation, is there about a dozen or more children?
They're all over this. Yeah. And the thing is, that there's Michael McCarthy's everywhere.
Yes.
Just to,
In this line you have Tim's son. Do you know? Have you a good idea when they were born? 34.
that's what they were all born on.
Okay. So Michael is the older. Most likely, if you were the oldest, more likely the grandfather is a Michael.
Well, that's the
The
information.
information is
Yeah.
in the members.
So maybe for Michael.
Right. And how much do you want to pay? You would just need a year's, let's say, of the births
Just
and
to
stuff.
say
Payment
that
person,
family-
birth dates and dates, marriage dates,
Okay.
and where. The dates and where.
The pedigree charts that you're giving out,
Yeah,
when you said, what about the family group sheets? Because that only gives the parents, you need the children's names also. So we, as well as the,
no, the pedigree chart is best to keep to the pedigree chart. The children can come later. We mainly want the direct ancestors going back from yourself. That's what we're really looking for.
And not the
You know,
sidelines.
Not the children as such, not all the children, okay?
sorry,
Sorry, could I just ask, do you think it might be possible to find out why a couple who got married in St Paul's in Dublin in 1874 got a dispensation?
Before they married, they got a dispensation.
It is in the church record, you know, dispensation, but it doesn't say why or anything. There's no.
The usual reason in the Catholic Church was consanguinity. They were fourth, second, third, or second cousins. Were they from that area? Or from Cork?
Well, the man was from Rush County Dublin. He was a farmer in Rush County Dublin,
Yes.
and the lady was a dog.
And what about age? Was she extra young? Was she underage?
Well, that's the thing, you see. I'm not sure because she doesn't tell the truth about her age on the census.
How unusual!
So I really, you know.
Most likely they are cousins in some way. You'll find maybe within 2 generations before that there is some connection. Now I've noticed that also in general. We have been marrying our cousins, especially on the land and in business, for hundreds of years, keeping it in the family. Now, a blind eye was turned, even though the law was there, church law. But from around 1870, the church tried to tighten up a little bit in the matter, and they were finding it difficult. So people still married their cousins, and they weren't asking for permission. So they had to correct it afterwards. I know of families where they got married. Yeah, that's my phone. They had 3 or 4 got married, 3 or 4 children, and they had to go away and get a dispensation and get married to the same man all over again. I knew one gentleman who was about 95. He just passed away recently. So in 1940s, 1950s, he had to go away and remarry his wife after having 1 son and about 4 daughters. So it was even being corrected until recently. It wasn't illegal according to the state to marry your cousin, but according to the church it was not acceptable. It was acceptable once you went through the correct procedure. And this was one of the, if you got a papal dispensation, I don't think it went all the way to Rome.
Were there any dodgy bishops around who were willing to take the fee? I was the same thing, an aunt who married a cousin of hers who was in the American Navy, and I don't know what relationship they were. We can't find out where they got married. They had one daughter born in England, they were scattered all over the place.
Yeah.
But nobody seems to know, back in the early 1900s.
Money always talks. One of my cousins out near the coast, he went and married a member of another faith, and he was actually excommunicated for doing that. He married in a church over in Wales, and Bishop Lucy, who's probably another ancestor of mine, he had a little problem because the family had handed over a bit of land and a building, which was a school, for the use of the locals, and the church was in charge of it. but it was to be handed back to the O'Sheas if it was no longer to be used as a school. Now, he wanted money, the bishop, and he found that if he could recreate it technically as a school with 2 new commissioners in charge of it, he could then get it back in his grip again. And he had to have the O'Shea's consent to redo that. So the price of becoming a Catholic again was handing over the school, and it worked. He used to drop his wife to the other church, and then he'd go to his church, and the 2 of them would go off home together, and everyone was happy, and the bishop got his few bob. Yes, Wendy?
I know that in the Church of England, you had to have a dispensation if you were being married, like over the Easter period. You had to have special permission to do that.
And also over the Christmas period. During the time of Advent and Lent, no marriages were permitted. It was a general rule, but in emergency cases they could turn the blind eye. Shrove Tuesday, the day before Lent started, the day before Ash Wednesday, there were quite a few marriages. And about 5 weeks before Christmas there were a few marriages, and straight after Christmas again, after Epiphany, there were quite a few again. So you had a glut of them, you'd see nothing, and you'd be wondering why. That was just the general rule. I think it's totally relaxed now, you could nearly get married anytime.
I was married on the 8th of December, and I had to get, my uncle was marrying me, and he was a Monsignor, and he had to go to the bishop and get permission for me to marry me on the 8th of December.
Yeah.
I know what that was.
But don't forget, in those days we had a lot of rules.
Very
No
strict.
eating meat on Fridays,
That's right.
fasts. You know, the amount of food you could consume, it was weighed by the ounce. You see, a lot of things that people don't realise now. So this was just one of many, many rules that have just gone by the wayside.
Changing the subject slightly.
Yeah.
I don't know if you mentioned this or not, and my hair isn't grey.
Okay.
But could you say something about the cancelled books?
Oh yes, yes. Yeah, thank you. Now, I mentioned Griffith's valuation before. Now, 1852-ish. But above in Dublin, in Lower Abbey Street, there are records continuing those books. You see, Griffith's valuation was set up for tax purposes, for cess and several other taxes. The equivalent are rates today. Now, the councils, the county councils, and all the local authorities wanted to continue with this rate system. So they updated. So whoever was the tenant or the user of land in 1852, they watched that land, they had to pay so much per year, and maybe 1854, if that gentleman died, his son was the next person, so they would go and strike his name out of the book in a particular colour, maybe yellow, blue, red, there was different time frames and different colours. They would write the new name next to it on a particular year. Now, that will give you a good hint as to when the first gentleman passed away, or when the property was re-registered in the tenancy of the new person. It could be a different surname altogether. Most likely it was the same family, or it could have been a son-in-law. So if you go through all the cancellation books, if you don't have the date of a death of a member of the family, you'll have a good ballpark figure to look at. And they went right up into the 20th century. So 1852 onward. So you've title Platinum, 1832. That's before the famine. After the famine, 1852. And then continuing on for quite a distance. Now, you'll have to know which sub-district your area is, because they're slightly different. DEDs would be the closest you'd find to them. Macroom has about 7 or 8. You'd want to look up maps. I remember I was looking for Clondrohid Parish, and there was 3 separate strips. Ullans to the west, Clondrohid itself to the centre, and to the east you had Rahalish. And then I wasn't interested in the other areas south of that at the time, but I will have to revisit because I have more research to do on that. So you'd want to know which district you're looking at, DEDs, or that's electoral divisions, or later on they became voting areas. You'd want to know which parish, because parishes fluctuated a little bit. You could be in one parish in one time frame, and those parishes could have amalgamated or subdivided. Now, you could be in a particular, in tithes, by the way, the parishes were the Church of Ireland parishes, not the Catholic parishes, and they could vary quite a bit. So they were not exactly on the same spot. They could overlap slightly with another parish. So for the state records, the state church was that parish you were dealing with. Later on, when you're looking at the Catholic parishes, Catholic church parishes. So just be aware, you might be 2 or 3 townlands out, you could be looking just over the hedge in the wrong spot. So just to be aware of that always.
If you go to the valuation office now, Brian, you can actually photograph the books.
Well, that's a big improvement, because I just had to take notes and they were very slow at handing them out, and you had a short window to look at them.
You get the complete book, I think for about another €3.60 for the complete, all the townlands on it. Now you have to watch, as you say, the colours, but if you have a very good camera, you can take it.
Oh, that's brilliant, yeah. And you had to pay to search each book the day I was up there.
And where are these books?
Valuation office in
They were Lower
Abbey
Abbey
Street.
Yeah, Lower Abbey Street.
Yeah, more or less opposite the VHI, Irish Life building. Opposite the VHI office.
Some of the books you will get in the archives here. About 1890, or maybe up to about 1910, 1915, 1920.
For the county or the city?
Yes, county.
Yeah, that's okay, I didn't know.
And because I've got some of them out there myself.
Yeah. There's an awful lot of stuff in the Cork archives that we're not aware of. It's you know, it's like a sweet factory. There's a lot of stuff in there. Not everything is fully indexed yet. There's a lot of boxes that haven't been gone through.
Right.
They're getting so much all the time, they're finding it very hard to cope all the time. They
You
probably
can
need more
actually
stuff.
write into the council books, write into them, and they do the searching for you. Now, I know it costs good, but more like it cost me over €20 or pounds maybe that time. On 2 different occasions I did it one time for a particular name, would say in a chunk of the countryside, and they got all the different places that had that surname, would say, you know.
Yes.
And another time I just got, would say, Townland.
Several of us here now have mentioned things. We've all found other little nuggets. Each one of us finds something extra, and the important thing is to share it, because nobody will ever know it all, you know. There's always another stone to be unturned.
The good news to come to the National Library.
Yes.
You can tell them about it.
What?
They're digitising all
Oh
this.
yes, next summer, yes.
Yeah.
All the microfilm is going to be released next June.
For all the
hopefully.
births, marriages and deaths.
Yeah. But
for all the parishes in Ireland.
I've seen dates come and dates go.
I know.
I believe it when I see it.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, like all of our births, marriages and deaths were available until a couple of months ago, and they came right up to the present day. I could see my own birth on the records, and suddenly they pull that away from us again. So if you find anything out there and it's important, spend a lot of time on it, because sometimes it mightn't be there tomorrow. You know, keep a copy of everything.
Going back to the dispensations, Brian, I've seen some of any of the ones I've come across in the Catholic records have been written in, but they're usually written in Latin, and you're inclined to pass over. You see the Latin, and unless you spot the word dispensation, you have to get an explanation for it from somebody who can translate. But they have been, I've seen quite a few of them written in Latin.
Another
on
thing,
the original books, they're not on the ones that are...
Yeah, that's right.
Another thing I've noticed after around 1880, especially for on the christening records, there's quite a few notes. It increases as time goes by. When, especially a lady, when she got married, no matter where she was, wherever she had been christened, there's a note put in after her christening stating, got married, where she got married, to who and who the witnesses were, what church. Now, it might be in Florida or California, it might be in the next parish, and some of that stuff actually is on microfilm, and some of that stuff is actually on the internet at the moment. If you look at the original item, I saw quite a few up around Mill Street direction, and I looked at them 1880, 1890ish, and it said what happened to them. You know, you might never ever find it otherwise. You know, the third son or the third daughter, they had to write back to their original parish for a letter of freedom, and that priest was diligent enough to put it into his book, and that's available for us all to find. You know, that's something that I didn't realise 2 years ago. That's another one of my discoveries. So, you know, there's always more, and keep on looking.
The Loch parish above is a disaster. Disaster. Who actually accelerates digitising? Is it Fossey through the one? West Cork, isn't it?
I don't know. All I know is that the Loch is a relatively new parish in time frame. If you want the earlier records for the Loch, you have to go to St Finbar South. St Finbar South was a huge parish. It went from Mahon and Blackrock, sweeping around most of Douglas, right around the city, right out as far as Ballincollig, everything south of the river, plus a little strip of the island of Cork City from Oliver Plunkett Street running southwards. It was a the cathedral parish was another massive parish. It was stretching almost to Tivoli, a sweep around the north side, right out into the country, and going right out beyond Cork-upon. And there's a huge number of entries there as well.
I tried for records about the South Parish and the Loch. Couldn't get anything, and I went down, and then half an hour down in Tratton Street I got it. Half an hour.
And
I had a fairly good dates.
Who had put in the entry? You see, the priest's duty was, after 1864, to do it himself, because he was acting on behalf of the state to put in that entry. But maybe he forgot to put it in his own book.
What about St Patrick's Church? St.
Yeah, St Patrick's Church was a chapel of ease for the cathedral. Anyone who was about to be buried was, for the south-eastern end of the parish, was placed in a small chapel there overnight, and then they were taken up over Tivoli to a graveyard that no longer exists. There's no trace of it. It was called St Brandon's, and there's now a house with a garden there. It's called Vosterburg. There isn't even a stone of that graveyard. But because this was a chapel of ease for the burials, and as the city grew and larger houses were built instead of little mud cabins that were there originally, it became a suburb of the city. They wanted a better church, and they built a church there. But strangely enough, the records for the christenings and the marriages for that area predate the building by about 10 or 15 years, and then they'll overlap the cathedral. Some of the earliest entries are also in the cathedral records. So, you know, you might think, I'm in this parish, therefore I must look here. See what the parent of that parish was. You might have to go back to that one. And another little thing, for marriages especially, the rule used to be that you went to the wife's parish, no matter what denomination, you went to the wife's parish for the marriage. But in my family, they rarely did. They usually, out in the countryside, into Cork City they went for that marriage. It wasn't that they were eloping or anything, but they just found it less difficult. If you left one relation out in the invitations, you might offend another one. So, to be diplomatic, you asked nobody, and away you went. And it isn't just on the Catholic side, on my Church of Ireland side. They all went into Cork City. You had, on both sides, St Finbar South, Catholic, and on the Church of Ireland side, you had St Finbar's Cathedral, and you had St Nicholas. And these people were coming up from Bandon, especially for, and it wasn't just my family, there were a lot of other families that were doing it. So, you know, you might say, we come from that area, therefore you'd expect us to be marrying here or expecting us to christen our children here. No, you might have to look in here first.
There was
They used to have the
also
breakfast in
some,
Cork and then go on the train.
Yes.
There were early marriages at 9 in the morning or half 9 and then took off.
St. Finbarr's South has quite a few marriages in the late early 1800s. Some days you might have 2 or 3, and later on it was Peter and Paul's, especially after Easter. I counted up to 12 marriages some day. They must have married them in groups, right? They couldn't have married them, ABC, because it would have taken the whole day. And they were coming from very large distances. They were coming from the Kerry border, especially to Cork City. I know of one case, one of our O'Sheas married another O'Shea, wink wink, and they didn't have a dispensation, and they knew that they'd have problems in their own area, so what did they do? Into Cork City, Peter and Paul's, no questions asked.
There was also some births, but especially marriages in the religious order churches. St. Francis, St. Augustine's, St. Mary's.
Yes.
Not many, but they were there.
And would this be in the 1880s or so?
Sorry?
Would this be 1880s or would it be later?
Oh, early and modern, yeah, right up to the present day.
They probably needed a dispensation for that because the
yeah.
regular clergy
yeah.
kept a very strict
Yeah.
order because they were losing income.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually went to the Dominicans asking had they any records, and they said
Didn't.
no. But they said no, and then go to Dublin and check at our headquarters if you don't believe us.
Yeah.
So there is always something more.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Because we were seeing little gaps, and we said no. They weren't in the cathedral record. They were living in that area.
Yeah.
We tried all the other parishes around,
Yeah.
and we said maybe the order. So I'm glad to hear that.
Right.
Thank you.
Some marriages back along took place in the priest's house. It wasn't even in the church.
Yes. And some of the early records they had to be very careful with them because 1745 it was forbidden for a Catholic to own land. So if you actually married in a Catholic church, it would be more or less de facto proof that you were a Catholic. So you could lose your lease or you could lose your land. So those records, they nearly had to put them in code. They have to be very careful. Not quite up as far as emancipation. I'd say around 1745 to about 1780ish. Or a discoverer might come along and grab it, But we were very lucky in Cork City actually to have the cathedral, the middle parish, and the south parish having records going back to 1745 and 1750. And the books still are existing. I've seen them all.
Yeah.
And some of the earliest writings are even better than what you'd see 100 years later.
Yeah.
And more legible and more carefully written.
Yeah.
I remember seeing the South Parish in their records, St. Finbar South. There was one particular priest, Father Walsh, and if you were extra wealthy and you were paying extra money, he took the marriage, and the other marriages, one little line, instead of having one entry, the curate was writing in 2 entries. He was squeezing it in, not to waste paper. But for the extra wealthy people, half a page, huge scrolled letters. And I remember one of the Newnhams of Coolmore was asking Father Walsh, about what were fees, and he was going through what he was charging, his menu of costs for the different items. And if the family were wealthy and could afford it, this was the special marriage, with all the trimmings and and then for quite a few of the christenings for the wealthy families, the witnesses, the sponsors weren't even there. They had proxy witnesses on behalf of other people who didn't even attend the service, and their names were also written into it. And the wealthiest of the wealthy didn't have just one Christian name, they might have about 5 of them. And the poor families, even though they might have 2 Christian names, only the first one was entered. So you could have been John Michael McCarthy, they'll only have you down as John McCarthy. So that's another little problem we might have. And if you go back into the countryside, we found this around Macroom and Clandrahood, that people are still known to this day by their own Christian name, their father's Christian name, and their grandfather. So I'd be John, Sean, John, and that would describe my branch of O'Shea's. It took us a while to click what these people were on about, because there were so many people of the same surname. You know, there might be another John Michael John. Now, John Michael John couldn't be the same as John Sean John. You know, so... And if there were, they'd have to throw a nickname, you know, or a townland or something in, to try and distinguish them, if the whole parish was full of the same name. So, is that enough?
Any more questions? Any more questions? Just thanks very much, Brian. Very good.